It seems to me that the psychotherapist today is confronted with two sorts of problem that are really rather novel for him. Because to a very great degree he's taking the place of the priest. Now he's not just a specialist who is dealing with deviant and aberrant forms of human being. He's becoming increasingly the guide, philosopher and friend to people who would ordinarily be considered average and normal. Now in this position it seems to me that he's dealing very largely with the problem of man's sense of identity. That is to say, who the average individual feels that he is, what he feels that he is. And in this respect, you see, the average individual has a problem because he's confronted with what Erich Fromm has called alienation. Alienation is the sense of feeling estranged from everything outside yourself. The sensation of confronting a social world and a natural world that is foreign to you and that stands over against you as something to be mastered. Now, this is a way of sensing one's existence that is in a special way peculiar to members of the Western world. To feel that I am a mind or a self enclosed in a wall or bag of skin, confronted by an external world that is not me. Now, more and more, the psychotherapist begins to be aware that this is a false sensation, that it's some kind of way of feeling into which we have been tricked by our education and by our upbringing. We, for example, ignore the fact that the individual and his environing world go together in the same way that two sides of a coin, the back and the front, go together, or that a figure and its background go together. You can't have one without the other. For example, you're looking at me, and if you could see nothing outside the outline of my head, you wouldn't be able to see my head. You would see eyes and nose and mouth, but the head you would not see. In order that there should be this outline confronting you, there must be, together with it, the background, which in our ordinary logic is not the head. But the head and its background, if we are to see them, go together. And so in the same way, the individual and the environment are like two poles, two aspects of one life. Now, ordinarily, you see, we're not aware of that. And so one of the great tasks of psychotherapy seems to me to enable us to be aware of that, to enable the individual to feel fundamentally at home in his world. And in this way, he comes to have a new grasp, a new dimension to the meaning of what used to be called the unconscious, the importance of making the unconscious conscious. Because you see, in the old schools of psychotherapy, whether they're of Freud or whether they're of Jung, the unconscious has largely been thought of as something within us, a sort of depth. It might be a neurological depth, processes that are neurological and that we're not ordinarily aware of, just as we're not aware of our glands functioning, or something even deeper than neurology, as it were an unknown dimension of an inward soul. But more and more it becomes clear that the unconscious is not merely something inside us, but something vastly outreaching, that it includes all kinds of social influences on us that we are not normally aware of, all kinds of influences of the natural environment. You see, a human being derives his meaning, his identity, from his context, in the same way as a word in a sentence gets its meaning from its context. See, the one word bark can have different meanings in a different sentence. And so the human being has different meanings in accordance with the context he's in. So if the setting makes the man, there is a sense in which the setting is the man.
Once I was consulted by an old general practitioner of the outer parts of Vienna, and he told me, Dr. Frankl, I come to see you because of a severe depression from which I'm suffering throughout the last 2 years since my wife died. And I can't get rid of this depression. It's nonsense to approach you, doctor, because any prescription I could make myself. But nevertheless, I had the feeling I should speak to you, talk with you. And then there was a pause, and he asked me, what should I do? And I didn't give him any advice. I didn't tell him anything, but I just asked him a question. I asked this old doctor, tell me, doctor, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife would have had to survive?
Had to survive, right.
Thereupon he said, oh, how this would have been terrible, how she had suffered. Thereupon I retorted, well, this suffering, doctor, your wife has been spared this suffering, and it was you who could spare her this suffering. But now, as it were, you have to pay for it. You are billed for it. By the fact that now you have to mourn, you have to suffer, you have to survive her. This man looked me up, and then he stood up, gave me his hand, and silently left my office. He found consolation in this reversal of attitude toward a fate which could no longer be changed. I could not revive his wife, you understand?
Right.
But I could change his attitude. Suddenly he saw a meaning, the meaning of a sacrifice. At the same moment, there was no depression any longer. He could overcome this depression. It remained still suffering, but it was suffering for the sake of someone.
So you're saying the events of life, apart from meaning, are useless.
Man cannot be healthy without meaning, without a meaning beckoning him. He could not even remain alive. You know who has said this? Albert Einstein.
Sounds familiar.
No psychiatrist.
Right.
And now I think psychiatry should be reminded of this primary motivational force in man. That man is primarily and basically reaching out for meaning. And man must be prepared to endure the tension between the meaning which is in wait for him and the being, the actual state of affairs. Life never ceases to have a meaning, to hold a meaning to each and any person. And this is due to that fact, precisely to that fact I was touching upon before.
Right.
The fact that even suffering may have a meaning. Of course, no suffering which is take-shouldered in a masochistic way, let's say unnecessary suffering. But that suffering which is imposed upon ourselves by fate, which is unavoidable.
By the events of life.
That's right.
Which may not be related to the quality of one's person.
That is right.
Right.
And such necessary, unavoidable suffering, inescapable suffering, it depends, what matters and counts is how we shoulder this suffering, how we approach this, the attitude which we adopt in such a situation. And finally, the third tenet is, after the will to meaning, the meaning of suffering, then the freedom of will. You say this is a chain of links, of interconnected links.
Now, an example of the freedom of will.
An example that my contention is man is never conditioned by conditions, but he is always free. He is never free from conditions, but what he is free is to take a stand toward the conditions confronting him. What man is, he ultimately has become through the cause which he has made his own. Was der Mensch ist, das wird durch die Sache, die zu seinen macht. We cannot find ourselves, our identity, except by devoting, committing ourselves to something or someone. We cannot struggle for self-actualization except through the detour of devoting ourselves to a course to the world, around the way guides us around the world,
right,
and not by direct intention of ourselves.
Right, that's a magnificent point.